I really appreciate you're spending this time with me. I've also heard you talk about cultural safety in relation to the healthcare system. What does it mean? How is it different from transformative change?
So cultural safety in the healthcare system would mean that anyone, and especially people who are racialized or marginalized in some way, should be able to access healthcare in a way that feels culturally appropriate for them, that feels culturally safe for them. I'll give you an example. In Nova Scotia, Black communities are large. And when someone is in a crisis, in emergency, or someone is near the end of life, and you say, call the family, you're not talking 4 or 5 people. You may be talking 20 or 30 people.
Oh, yeah.
And when 20 or 30 people converge in an emergency room for one patient, healthcare systems become really upset. Healthcare professionals become upset, and they don't quite know how to deal with that. So part of the work is helping them understand what that's about and creating space for the family to be able to meet. So yes, you're absolutely right. You can't have 30 people in an emergency room, but maybe you create a room where the family can wait and have some privacy and have some safety.
Yes.
It's a final rite of passage. When you're in a critical state with someone, either through an emergency situation or through end of life. And the transitioning, how that person transitions, a lot of that will depend on what kind of conditions you set around that person.
Yeah.
And part of what that person may need or want in that moment is to have that family, that extended family support.
Yeah.
So how do you make that happen? How do you create space for that? And I've seen that happen in a few instances where healthcare teams have recognized the significance of it and said, we must do this. And I'm impressed with that. And I think that's what will help transform the healthcare system. When healthcare systems can be responsive to the specific needs of the clients they're serving. One of the exciting things that's happening right now in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, the Dartmouth General Hospital is actually working with the Preston communities to figure out how they can better serve those communities. The Preston communities are the largest Black communities in the province, and the Dartmouth General is the closest hospital setting. So they are working with the community to try to figure out what would be the best pathways. What are the best pathways so that we provide best services? And they actually have a project looking specifically at heart disease.
Okay, so my takeaway from that is that this safety, cultural safety, is an important part of transformative change. If we to actually have a proper transformative change, it has to be a part of it.
Yes. And engaging with communities will help with the transformation in healthcare. And we have research to show that it's needed. We're talking about transformative change in education. And again, we have the research that says we need it.
Yeah.
We're talking about transformative change in the justice system. And again, we have lots of research that points to the need for transformative change. And if we have changes in those areas, those are the things that are going to put an end to systemic racism. Those will be the things that will put an end to the systemic barriers that privilege some groups while oppressing others. So that's the kind of change we need throughout our systems.
Mm.
And we can't do it piecemeal.
No, we can't.
So the systems
Um,
also need to be talking to each other.
yes, yes. So I'm going to open up the questions a bit now, because with the global outcry of anti-Black racism, fueled by the Black Lives Matter movement that you mentioned earlier, we've been seeing a number of openings for jobs on diversity and inclusion, and some of us are still a little worried because we're hoping it won't be a case of add a little black, uh, add a dash of black and then stare. What advice do you have for people who find themselves in organizations in which they're the token person of color? How do they really make a difference without getting overwhelmed by the culture of the organizations, which might be thinking, okay, now we have a black person, we've done our part.
That's the when I started work at Dalhousie, that's what I went in. I was a token, and I I acknowledged that tokenism. Somebody has to be first.
Yeah.
And the message that I used to bring forward was this: someone has to be first. So I accept this token position at this point in time, if it opens the doors for others, not if it closes doors. So I've really stressed the importance of using the opportunities and the privilege that we're given when we're entering these spaces
Mhm.
to really work to open those spaces up, to bring others along. So one of the things that's important is that there needs to those institutions that are opening doors, they need to recognize that by opening the doors, they also need to focus on changing the culture of the organization. And this work around equity and diversity and inclusion isn't the work for that one person that's hired. It's work that the entire organization needs to be involved with.
Yeah.
I actually did a reference for someone the other day for one of a position like that in a big institution. And I said to the person doing the reference check with me, I said, look, I think this person will be excellent, excellent for the job. But it's not just her job.
Mhm.
Change is the organization ready for this? You're creating this position, but are you ready for what
Mm.
that means? And it was interesting because they were doing a reference check with me for this person that they're looking to hire into the position. I'm doing a check with them.
Mhm.
I started doing a check with them to make sure that as an institution,
Mm.
they were prepared to deal with what this position brings, and I know how this person will be in the position.
Mm.
And to my absolute delight, they said that person raised that issue in the interview,
Awesome.
and the institution is ready to move forward.
Mm. Because in the long run, it's in that person's interest to see that they don't remain that token.
They can't be.
They
Yes.
can't. No, they can't.
Mm.
Thank
It's
you.
that doesn't help any of us in the long run.
Yeah, yeah. People need to hear, what you said about when you went into Dalhousie and the kind of positions you took and the things you were able to achieve. Because yes, it's very popular now. Almost, if you
Mhm.
look at 10 job vacancies, there are 3, 4, for equity, inclusion, and all of that. And yeah, most of us are happy, that these doors are opening. Yeah, but we don't want them to just be a phase. We want them
That's
to
right.
have, a
That's right.
lasting, yeah,
But
lasting
I share your worry around that.
effect.
Absolutely. And I've seen a number of universities as well creating space for Black scholars.
Mm,
And, quite frankly, I'm excited about it on one hand, but on the other hand, I'm worried about again, the positions that they're bringing people into. And if the institutions aren't ready to change, aren't ready to look at things with a different set of lenses, then we're setting people up for failure.
I know. Now, we just completed a Black History Month, and the theme of the Black History Month this year is the future is now. A lot of people in Africa do not even celebrate or see the need for Black History Month. Why should we encourage the celebration of Black History Month globally? Why should we celebrate Black history globally?
Well, that's an interesting question. So as I mentioned earlier, this year marked the 25th anniversary of celebrating Black history in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we still need to celebrate Black history is also a signal that we haven't addressed the root causes of anti-Black racism. The celebration of Black history was meant as a way of augmenting what was happening in society, what was happening in schools, what was happening in the media. It was meant to shine a spotlight, for that 1 month of the year because of what wasn't going on elsewhere. The reality is that we're still doing Black History Month in the same way because there's not a lot of Black history fully integrated 25 years later. And it's longer than that in Nova Scotia, over 30 years. We're still looking at Black History Month as a way of educating when it shouldn't be. So if we're shifting the meaning,
it shouldn't be, because by now we should all be educated enough to just enjoy the celebration.
It should be celebration and not an education, but it still very much needs to be an education because we haven't done what's needed to be done in the education system and in all of these other systems. They haven't done enough.
And I'm sad. It's sad to see that countries in Africa you'll be surprised at how very few schools in Africa actually teach African history. Usually priority is given to what they called world history, but which usually is European history and, history handed to us by the by the colonizers.
Right. So many Africans immigrate to countries like Canada, and they don't recognize racism.
No.
Because they haven't experienced it. But they have experienced deep colonization. Yes. They have experienced systemic racism, but it's not known as such. When you look at the history of colonization and the impact it's had on African nations, that's why there's this emphasis on teaching European history.
Yeah.
Because European history is seen as more important. European history is seen as more relevant. European history is seen as a better gateway to a more promising future, right? Not African history.
Yeah, and it's one of the tools used to continue to keep the minds colonized in thinking that solutions can only come, from European countries or North America, because it's only their history of development and things like that our children are taught. Other than that, they're taught about slave trade, and other things like that, but not the achievements of the African empires, or the fact that the cradle of civilization, the first that Egypt, which was an integral part of Africa, is responsible for all of the development, laying the foundation for all of the development in the world as we know it today.
And even the reality that Egypt is a part of Africa
is being challenged.
Yes. But even access to materials. I
Mm.
remember teaching, I had the privilege of going to Nigeria as part of a program at York University,
Mm.
bringing social work education to Nigeria and the University of Benin. And being absolutely, the course I taught was on Afrocentric social work.
Mm. Yeah, I know your work with the
What
AB.
does that mean in Africa
Yes,
when people have only been exposed to European
yes.
social work theories?
Yeah.
It was painful.
With all we've been saying about systemic racism as something that has significant people on impact on people's health, well-being, and the ability to actualize themselves. Is it far-fetched then to see that systemic racism is also a global phenomenon, and that racism is not confined to the borders of individual countries?
You're absolutely right. And I think that the Black Lives Matter global movement that happened after the murder of George Floyd, that signaled to the world the significance of anti-Black racism and that it can happen anywhere and everywhere. Having that Black Lives Matter as a global movement, I think it's a very positive thing. It's sad and traumatic that it's come about because of the murder
Mm.
of this man. And it's interesting that we're having this conversation today because the trial
Yeah.
for the man who was primarily responsible
Mm.
has just started.
Mm.
And jury selection, that in itself has taken more than a week. I think that tells us something.
Mm.
But the world is watching.
Mm.
And the world is watching not because of what's happening in that instant, not only because of that, but the world is watching because it wants to see how America will deal with this.
Mm.
It wants to see how that state will deal with this because of the impact that that has for the rest of the world.
Mm.
And many people, the knee on the neck is the slogan. And people have been using that around the world to symbolize
Mm.
systemic racism.
Mm.
Systemic racism is like the knee on the neck.
It is.
Symbolically, it's the knee on the neck of
It
Black
could be the
children.
knee on the neck of an individual. It could be the knee on the neck of countries, or a knee on the neck of a whole continent.
And that's what
People should be allowed to breathe.
yes, and that's what we're seeing. If we look at looking at what's happened in Africa, it's painful.
Mm.
The continent, people still talk about Africa as though Africa was a country.
I know.
as opposed to a continent. So we've got a continent that's been impacted by anti-Black racism.
Mm.
And many people don't even know that.
Even leaders, even leaders of nations, but they don't know that.
And so the knee on the neck,
Mm.
which we may call colonization,
Mm-hmm.
has a stronghold.
It does. It does. And we're supposed to be in the middle of the decade for people of African descent, with pillars of recognition, justice, and development. Yeah. So are these pillars? Do you think are these pillars achievable? And then how can actions be organized to actually see that if we work towards achieving them, even if we can't,
So I believe that these are achievable.
Okay.
They won't happen in this decade. I see the decade the same way that I see Black History Month.
Okay.
The decade is an opportunity to shine a light on these issues.
Okay.
The decade is an opportunity to highlight what needs to be done in these issues. And it should be signaling to us around the world
Uh-huh.
that these are things we must do if we are to address anti-Black racism across the world.
Totally.
So I have not had much opportunity to explore how this is happening
Uh-huh.
in African nations,
Uh-huh.
but I think it's something that needs to happen.
Okay.
But quite frankly, we've been so busy trying to move this country forward that we haven't been able to look at this from a global perspective. But that's the next thing that needs to happen.
Thank you. And my last question is, as someone who started her anti-racist work from a very early age, I've heard you speak about starting when you were as young as 12 or 13. What do you have to say to young people of color out there who cannot see a future to actualizing their full potential because of racism, and might be thinking, well, maybe there really is no end in sight, and so why should I bother?
Many of us who've been working on these issues for generations will continue to work on these issues of systemic racism, anti-Black racism. We will continue to push, to fight for change. We will continue to remove barriers. We will continue to try to enact the justice, development, and recognition so that those barriers are removed. What we need young people to do is to maintain hope and also to prepare themselves. When an opportunity opens up, I need you to be prepared to walk into it. So the preparation needs to meet opportunity. So for young people, your job is to prepare yourself mentally, emotionally, physically, all of the things we need to do. And part of that is actually having an education. We're not going very far in this world without an education. So being credentialed, some people, poo-poo credentialization, but being credentialed is very important. There's no way around that. If you want to be an engineer, you have to study engineering. No one's going to give you a job as an engineer if you don't have the qualifications. If you want to be a social worker, you have to study social work. If you want to be a physician, you have to study medicine. So that preparation needs to happen. And I want young people to be able to focus on their work and on their preparation while we're focused on ensuring that the opportunities will be there.
Thank you very much, Wanda, for all you've been doing, for these inspiring words, and for all I know you'll continue to do. I'm really honored to have you on the Sankofa Pan-African series as my guest. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the Sankofa Pan-African series channel, like our videos, and please share them with your contacts.